Hello and welcome to another episode of the Classical Republican. Today I am in Henderson, Nevada, which is appropriate because the Silver State became a part of the Union, or a state, during the Civil War. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. That's going to play a big role in what we're talking about today, because we are talking about Thaddeus Stevens and his classical republicanism. Okay. So Thaddeus Stevens lived from 1792 to 1868. He was born in Vermont to a poor family, and he had a club foot. So that made a big impact on his life, having that disability. The author Bruce Levine writes that it's important to know what was going on in 1792 and prior to that time when he was born, because you had a great struggle. You had small farmers going to Vermont, and they were granted that land by the government of New Hampshire. However, New York had a claim, and they wanted to push out all the small farmers, and they wanted absentee landowners, they wanted land speculation. They just wanted to make money off the land and not really bring goodness to the lives of small farmers. So he moved to Pennsylvania when he was a young man, and became a lawyer. He got into politics with almost every party there was at the time, except for the Democrats. So Know-Nothings, Anti-Masons, the Whigs, and eventually in 1855 he joined the brand spanking new Republican Party. But he entered public office first in 1833 as a member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. Now, I want to talk a little bit about his ideology. He was a great crusader for education, and also later on during the Civil War, property of the redistributive nature. I'm going to do a companion video on his speech on education before the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. But I will say here that speech really shows that he saw education as the great equalifier of the people. And that if you have education, and everyone has the same chance at education in their early life, then they, then the government really doesn't have to intervene at other points to be able to help bring equality to the republic. Because in classical republicanism, equality is a very important principle. He enters Congress later on. He's there for the great 1850 compromise. He was against the compromise, actually, because it still allowed for a lot of slavery, and he was already an ardent abolitionist at this time. He goes on to chair the Ways and Means Committee, also Appropriations. He later co-chairs the Reconstruction Committee. And later, during the impeachment of President Johnson, he's one of the impeachment managers. Let's see. So he also helps with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Those are the great Reconstruction Amendments. So the 13th gets rid of slavery. The 14th brings political rights to everybody, and males. And then the 15th Amendment. The 14th Amendment brings political rights to everybody, and then the 15th Amendment brings the right to vote to all male adults. Okay. Now, during the Civil War, he helps to create the Freedmen's Bureau, and one of the main missions of the Freedmen's Bureau is education of the former slaves. And that's to help bring them up to speed so they can be participants in democracy, in a democratic society, and in a classical republic too. Then he goes on. And then one of the Freedmen's Bureau's missions is also they get all this land, and he wants to use it to redistribute to the former slaves. But that doesn't go as planned. We will see. He talks about in 1866 when he's talking about the 14th Amendment. He says the 40 acres of land and a hut would be more valuable than the immediate right to vote. So he he really has this thing about property. Citizens need to have property, not just to have property, but to be able to fend for themselves, to take care of themselves, so they do not suffer from domination. Okay, so a very important classical Republican principle is that liberty means not being dominated. Okay, so it is said that he stood for human equality, but I think I've shown that it is a very Republican flavor of human equality. Later on, his housekeeper, Lydia Hamilton Smith, becomes his property manager, and eventually she buys a house off of him. And he did that with the purpose of making a statement that people should have property, and then also have the right to vote. And then and she was a woman, so he later came out in favor of women's suffrage, the women's right to vote. So Thaddeus Stevens was a great classical Republican, and perhaps someday the GOP may return to this Harringtonian rather than Lockean inspiration. Long live the Republic.